So hi everyone, I am Ericka and I'm here to talk to you about how we retrofitted accessibility into one of our apps. But before we start talking about how we did it at K15t, let's talk about why we did it. So accessibility is what it's right. There's no way around it. If you want an inclusive app with good design, then it has to be accessible to different needs. Also, becoming accessible expands your user base by quite a lot. Actually, like by 1.3 billion, a lot, because 1.3 billion people in the world experience significant disability. This means around 60% of the world's population. So, the first thing you need to know about incorporating accessibility is that the most straightforward, cost-effective, time-efficient way is to do it from the start. But what happens when accessibility fell behind between the cracks, behind other priorities, and now you have a fully launched app with users out in the marketplace? Does that mean it's too late for accessibility? Definitely not, because it's always better late than never. So before we start diving in, I'll just quickly introduce some terms that will be core for our talk, starting with the World Wide Web Consortium, W3C for short. It is an international organization that develops different web standards, including the WCAG, which are the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. These are the international standards for web accessibility, and we can break them down into 3 levels. Level A being like the most basic ones. Then we have level AA, which are the ones that are used in most standards and the ones that we usually try to go for. And then we have AAA. These ones are higher level, but also usually imply letting some things go, so it's not so common yet around. But only talking about WCAG could easily take me over an hour, so I won't. But at the end of this presentation, you can find useful resources if you want to dive into other topic. So I was also part of the 2 developer team that took the initiative of making our Scroll Viewport Help Center theme WCAG AA compliant. And what is a Scroll Viewport? Well, to put it shortly, this is an app from ours, of course, that turns Confluence pages to useful Help Center websites, or through using themes, through just a couple of clicks. Knowing the wide audience that the help centers of our customers have, we of course wanted to make them accessible to the to the widest audience possible, regardless of technology or ability. And now we can move on. So accessibility solutions don't only improve the experience to those users that need accessibility or that have disabilities, but rather it also improves the experience to all of your user base. What does this mean? So accessibility removes barriers, driving inclusion. Thinking about accessibility solutions doesn't only help, for example, people that need screen readers, but also people that need to select text from your app because they need to translate it, or also people with different learning preferences, or keyboard users that simply like to use keyboards. Then also, it helps improve usability. How? Well, usability is about making apps efficient, effective, and satisfying for your users. Accessibility ensures that your apps are efficient, effective, and satisfying for even more users. For example, the case of having in mind good contrast of your app doesn't only benefit people that have visual impairment, but also helps people that, for example, are using your app under bright sunlight or don't have the best quality of monitors. So this at the end improves the experience for everyone and increase the potential users your app can have. So before we start our journey, we have our first step, and to be honest, this might be the toughest step of all, which is to start a conversation and to create a network of allies. To create a network of allies, you have to find people that care. And if it's becoming hard to find people that care, then you have to convince people to care. I know it's tough, but I'll give you a tool, so don't run away yet. So then, before that, we also have to understand that designers are your allies. You'll have to collaborate, because to make a true accessible product is not only about fixing the code base. You have to also have good design, accessible design. And also you have to convince your designer that accessible design doesn't mean that aesthetic design is gone. You can find a balance that makes both parties happy. So I've been saying a lot of convincing people, and well, I bring you a tool for this. I must say that when I talk about accessibility, I don't like to focus in compliance, but oh boy, compliance is a great tool when you want to gain negotiating ground. How so? So, we love to comply with standards. We have the ISO, SOC, and so on, all these checkboxes we love to just check out. And for accessibility, there's also such standards. For example, in the US, there's the Americans Disability Act, and this one will ask for compliance with the WCAG for all public entities, meaning, for example, public libraries, universities, hospitals, and so on, that have over 50,000 users. And then in Europe, we have the European Accessibility Act, which requires WCAG compliance by July 2025, this summer, from key sectors such as banking, transport, and e-commerce. So to be honest, accessibility has stopped being this nice to have, and it's becoming a legal requirement. So if that doesn't help you convincing, just call me and we can find another tool. Okay, so with that out of the way, now we're ready to start our accessibility journey. This is a simplified version of the accessibility journey we had with Scroll Viewport. What I want you to take most out of this slide is that it's not a one-time goal, but rather a cycle. Because the WCAG, which are the guidelines we're following, are always a work in progress, so they're always evolving. Right now, version 2.2 was not so long ago published. Version 3 is already in work. But don't panic, this doesn't mean that whatever you do today, when a new version comes out, you need to start again. They're built on top of each other, so whatever you do today will work for tomorrow. So the first step is to educate yourself. And now, as developers, I think it could be, especially front-end developers, it could be easy to think that if you add enough ARIA roles, ARIA labeled by, and alt text, you'll be able to fix and accomplish accessibility. But it's not. And I think that the thing you need to learn the most about educating yourself is learning to empathize with your user. So you need to understand their needs, how they actually navigate the web, what tools they use, and so on. W3C provides a lot of good documentation about this, and I will also share with it at the end. But yeah, don't think like you have to memorize the guidelines to be able to be accessible, but rather just try to understand your user. And once we have educated ourselves, it's time to realize something very ugly, and it's how annoying it can be to use your own product when it's not accessible. So you start evaluating your app, and there's a ton of there's a ton of automated tools that are great, but to be honest, for the first time you do it, I would recommend you do it manually. This will help you not only get better acquainted with the guidelines and so on, but also it helps you to empathize and to experience your product as your users. Will be like a long process, so I think a very important thing is to document everything. For our case, we use a simple Confluence page with a table where we wrote like the description, the level of the guideline we were failing, also the guideline, and the most important, it was notes that we were leaving each other with my coworker, sharing either knowledge, resources, or if we had an idea already how to fix it. Especially when collaborating in an asynchronous way, it's very important to do knowledge sharing, because you might be the one that finds the problem, but you might not be the one that ends up fixing it. So if you know something, just let other people know. Also, it was a lot. So for the case of the Help Center, we have multiple types of pages, and what we did is broke down the evaluation in the different types of pages we had, such as main, search, content, or other global elements. So do take everything step by step. And now it's time to get down to work. So I would love to tell you that now that you have everything documented, you can sit down for either a week, a sprint, or a quarter, and you'll be done with it. But in real life, bugs happen, new features happen, new priorities, so you'll have to take pauses, and that's also fine. And that's why documenting is so important, because it's a favor to future you to know where you left off, or also it's good for your coworker that might jump in to know where they can start from. Be cautious with trying to overdo ARIA roles or ARIA labels or alt text just because it feels accessible in your code, and test it, because you might end up noticing that there's so many labels that are just background noise when you're actually using the app. And also use the solutions that are out there. For example, either semantic HTML elements or libraries that take into consideration accessibility, such as Atlas Kit or also the Force UI Kit. There's no magical accessibility library, so please don't take that as my words, but there's already like some problems that come fixed out of the box. And remember that however you compose and customize your components, at the end is what plays a major role in making your app truly accessible. And while we're at the work, now we have to also do something in parallel to this, and it's to share the progress. I know it can be awkward to be talking about what you're doing when you're not even finished, but if your idea of educating and advocating for accessibility is to publish an amazing 3-page long blog post at the end of it, I have a spoiler, most people won't read it. So the best way to do it is to just share updates week by week with whatever you did, showing screenshots or giving a quick demo of how these accessibility fixes are actually improving the app in general. And we're almost done, but this also means evaluating again, because we are not perfect, and probably while we were doing our first evaluations, things escape our hands, or something that will happen, even if it's annoying, is that while you're fixing accessibility issues in one side of the app, you will other issues will be introduced in other parts, in new features, or it just happens. And that's also why it's important to have an accessibility first mindset when you're working on this. But we're going to talk about it in a moment. For this second evaluation, what we used was the WCAG EM report tool. Not only because it's cool to use new tools, but also because at the end of this process, then we had like a full-fledged accessibility report tool, report to share with the world. So I would recommend it. It's very easy to set up. And now, when it's time to celebrate, it's also time to communicate to the world by publishing your accessibility statement. Of course, it has to have like the level of compliance you reached, and also like the values of your company and other things. But the most important thing to have is a contact form, because you need to be reachable to your users, and they need to be able to contact you and tell you if there's something you can improve. Because as we have discussed, the journey is ongoing, and the field is always evolving. So the way to be truly accessible is to always have an open door to improvements. And now we have reached the end of our journey, or should I say the start? Because as I have said, it's always ongoing. And for this reason, it's important to have strategies to have accessibility in the longevity of your organization and team. What does this mean? It means like having accessibility in a thought and not an afterthought, always having it as a priority, because otherwise, in 2 years or 3 years, we're gonna be back again with a lot of issues to fix because we didn't have time at the moment. So this means that accessibility has to be taken into account when planning, when talking about design, when developing, for example, including accessibility linters into your coding environment, or also even when testing, like just go through it with the screen reader, make sure it works, that it makes sense, and so on. And with small efforts like these ones, it's like the only way that you will keep accessibility in the long term. Even if it sometimes means being that annoying coworker raising the hand and saying, hey, but what about accessibility? What about this pledge we already made or the statement we already published? And before I finish, I just want to leave you with a tiny inspirational thought that might help you with this journey. And it's that disability is often thought of as the something that limits a person's ability. But in reality, it's the systems, structures, the processes that weren't designed to include everyone. A person in a wheelchair can easily reach the second floor when there's an elevator, and a person that is blind can definitely enjoy art in a museum when things are not only visual or everything says do not touch. And anyone with any disability can be part of our user base if we start making truly accessible products. Thank you. It's perfect.